about being Big Brother, going into the property and inspecting it, it's not a let me go into everybody's home and see what they're doing. It's more of let me see if there are violations. Going as far as the inspections, it's not going into every single unit at one time. Carrie could talk a little more about that, but it's code enforcement and the officers out there will have this in their mind. They don't want to become a nuisance on people, but they're doing what needs to be done in order to make sure that this rental housing is adequately maintained.
And through the chair, I think that, Carrie, one thing you might talk just a little bit about that's an important thing for the council and community to understand is that in code enforcement, there's a critical difference between what many cities provide, which is a complaint-based response, a complaint-based system for all code enforcement, where you're only responding to things when somebody complains about them. And this is part of a significant change, a significant improvement in the overall quality of code enforcement services for the city, going to a proactive overall approach to code enforcement services. It's a totally different and much more active and much more engaged approach to dealing with code enforcement overall.
Yeah, I just want to observe, this is really a red letter day for quality of life in our city when that statistic of 50% rental. This is a huge quality of life issue, and it's really, somebody has to stand up for the people in our community to ensure that the law is complied with. And for the city to do that, this is actually all about hope. It's like, well, if in my city people are standing up for me and saying I deserve a better deal in life than what I've had, that sends a message to kids and families that's huge.
Mr. McGarvey, you had something else?
Yeah, just one more thing. We've been focusing on apartments. Something that Mayor Sander has said in the past, and I know it's true also, is that over 50% of the housing in Rancho Cordova is rental. It isn't all apartments, it's duplexes, it's townhomes. So some of those are also having problems. I know some of your older duplexes you can drive by and it looks like they need some help. Are those being addressed also?
Yes, it's all rental housing, residential rental housing properties.
And I would just like to add that in all the years I've done this, when I actually explain to people, they may be a little nervous up front and they'll step back and they'll go, well, my house is a bit, I say I have 4 children and I know what it's like when you've got an untidy house. I am not here to look at your housekeeping. We're here for health and safety, and we really don't have problems with people just saying, no, don't come in. But if they chose not to be inspected, unless we had something that we saw from the door that was health and safety related and would warrant us going and asking for a court order, there wouldn't really be a reason if someone really felt that they didn't want us to come in.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Bunch?
Yeah, a couple questions. So the way the process works then, are you getting referrals from the Fair Housing
Human Rights
and Human Rights Agency also?
Yeah, we get calls from Fair Housing as we refer people back to them too. We are just setting up right now how we're going to systematically work through the complexes. To be quite honest, with what we've been doing, as we've sort of been doing some practice proactive, we've been looking at the worst of the worst, but we see going through the neighborhoods. But yes, Fair Housing has been really helpful to us. We keep their books on hand. We hand those out to some of the residents. We also have a direct line at the RCNC that they can pick up and talk to someone from Fair Housing at any time. So the tenants...
Because we get their weekly newsletter, and
yes,
they talk about issues like this all the time. One of the things this week's newsletter talked about was process, and so it sounds like reading the kind of connective tissue between the different sections of the ordinance, it sounds like you could inspect something and have the owner willingly correct the violations before you actually had to file the notice and order and get more intensely punitive with them?
Yeah, the notice and order actually has a date on it that says on or before this date, please do this, this, and this, and this. So every landlord gets an opportunity to fix whatever we may find that's an issue before there's anything that's punitive. As Philip was saying, if it's something minor, we might just say, hey, you need to take care of this. They'll say, can you pop back next week? And we won't even bother to do, a notice and order on it. But we like to give people a notice and order so they've got a checklist and they know what we're expecting of them, and then we make arrangements. So we try to be cooperative depending on the health and safety issue as to how long they think it's going to take for them to especially if it's something costly like heating system, we try to work with them on time unless it's something that we say needs to be done immediately.
Well, and I think every one of us, there's no question that everyone does agree that this is a red letter day just based on the examples that you've showed us. How does the rental housing registration requirement differ from the need to get a business license? We talked about people who own more than a certain number of rentals need to have a business license also. How does this registration differ from that? Or is it in addition to that, or what?
It's going to be in addition to that. Currently, in order to get the business license, they don't have to provide as much detail as they do under the registration requirement. Further, it will capture all rental owners, not just the ones required to have a business license. So our intent is to have a thorough list that we could have, a spreadsheet, if you will, in order to make sure to see who we're checking off, who we still need to go. And this includes the single-family residents who may not be having a business license but will be required to register.
What's the fee?
45.
To be determined, but do you have an estimate?
The fee
for registration?
Currently, we're still looking at how much it's going to cost in order to keep that registration going.
And that comes back to this body?
Yes.
To pay for the service?
There are actually a couple fees. There's the fee that we're currently collecting, the rental housing code compliance fee. And that's going to be the majority of the fee, which is going to run the program. Again, that fee, the fines and penalties from the violators, and grants. We're also going after grants in order to run this program, in order to have whatever fee we need to keep the registration or to keep any other paperwork as little as possible.
Any other questions?
I think the challenge will be, to the extent that a charge is imposed, collection. But I think that's an issue that we ought to just force in the sense that as between a broad-based funding that hits all of our landlords or ones that really puts some sort of penalty imposition on problem landlords, I think it makes more sense to go that route. And you have to know going in that collection can be an issue. Getting a lien, or you can impose various charges, and there's a lot of your cost and overhead that you can tack on, but actually getting a judgment paid or a lien satisfied, there's going to be some challenge with that. But I actually think going that route will be an attention getter. Sort of like having Phil Nichols out there talking to landlords so that he actually realizes that the city is serious on this issue. That's sort of a watershed event for us, that the status quo is no longer the way it is. And I think this sort of funding mechanism is consistent with getting people's attention. And in the long term, we'll just have to stay on top of it to make sure that it is seen as a real ordinance and not sort of a toothless tiger that there's a hubbub with it initially and then there's not the resources to implement it. Because that's where implementation is, execution is always the key.
Well, let me build on that a little bit. I don't think it's a secret to anybody in the room that the amount and quality of rental housing in Rancho Cordova was a prime motivator for the city's incorporation. That was a constant theme during that campaign. It's been a constant issue in this community for probably decades.